Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2023 Hack Summit. And we're going to have an incredible panel for you today on cross-chain bridges with Vaibhav and Arjun, who are each building technologies in this ecosystem. And it's my privilege to have you guys today. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Me.
So I'd like to start this off with some introductions. So Arjun, do you want to go first and just talk a little bit about yourself, your background, what got you into Web3, and then a little bit about your project and the problems that your project is trying to solve?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Arjun. I'm one of the founders of Connext. I first became involved in Web3 stuff in 2016. I just kind of I had a background in physics, and I was just really interested in I kind of realized that it wasn't as interesting to pursue physics academia as to try to find ways to solve problems that exist in the real world. And one of the key problems that I was interested in solving was how you can have public infrastructure like the internet that is globally accessible to everyone. And so that pretty quickly led me to Ethereum because that was really the main platform, the main place that people were talking about that at the time. I started building infrastructure in the space back then. At the time, I think I was working on what you would now call meta transactions, basically gas abstraction for people who wanted to build on top of the EVM. And then in 2017, I kind of realized as part of doing that there was this broader need for basically building infrastructure that helps make the whole process of interacting with blockchains a lot simpler. And so I started Connext back then in 2017. With a very simple thesis of let's find ways to bring this ecosystem to a much larger user set, to basically make Ethereum usable by normal people. So pretty quickly that led us to the L2 scalability research space, because at the time scalability was the main UX blocker. And we became one of the first teams implementing layer 2s on top of Ethereum. We actually built the first general purpose L2 on Ethereum, which is a state channel network in 2018. And then since then, we're working really closely with the rest of the L2 R&D ecosystem, and then pivoted into cross-chain communication in 2020-ish, just because we saw that there was this very big shared problem that everybody that was building rollups and other chains had around being able to get rid of this fragmented experience of having to interact with multiple of them at the same time.
Awesome, thank you, Arjun. And Vaibhav, would you like to go and tell us about your background and also about Socket?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've been kind of involved in the space for, I think, quite a bit. I don't actually remember which year, but kind of started off on day zero trying to solve the scalability problem. Basically, coming from a country like India, transaction fees on Ethereum costing a shit ton of money for spending almost 15 days in India, which was definitely not something I could kind of go forward with. So start working with Polygon on day one, trying to build Plasma. Then we built Polygon POS. Back in 2019, I built one of the first ZK rollup implementations. Was convinced that rollups are the future. So yeah, I have been kind of involved in the scaling space. And I think in 2020, 2021, kind of realized that scaling and interop are actually the same problem. And to solve scaling, we need to solve the interop problem. So yeah, kind of started working on Socket. Socket is, again, we can dive into details later. But yeah, overall, kind of a cross-chain protocol allows you to call a function on one chain from a function on another chain. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And maybe I'd love for the audience to learn a little bit more about the differences between, for example, bridges and bridge aggregators and how bridges work, as well as just how your technologies work. So if you guys want to each go in a little bit more depth on that, I think we'd appreciate that understanding.
For sure. Do you wanna start, BC?
I think better would be to start with the bridge so that bridge aggregator context makes more sense.
Sure. So a bridge is basically a way to relay information between blockchains or rollups in blockchains. And with the ideal goal being doing that without introducing trust. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. I mean, at its very basic sense, all you're doing is taking data from one chain and posting to the other. And the challenge comes from kind of figuring out how you verify that data. And so most bridges and most of the way thinking around bridges that exist today classifies bridges by how they're verified. And there's a number of different ways to do that. In general, most of the bridges that are live today use some form of external verification, which means that they have like a third-party set of people that are attesting that something happened here from reading data that over here. But then there's also other approaches like clients. So this is kind of what like IBC does and what a lot of the newer proof-based bridging models are doing. And then of course rollup bridges themselves, which are verifying the full state of one chain-like environment, which is the rollup on another chain. And that's how they go upwards in terms of like of trust assumptions. In general, we Connext Connext in general tries to like solve a slightly different problem. One thing that we've realized is that there is actually an optimal answer for what the best verification mechanism is for a given chain and a given ecosystem. While most other bridges and most other type approaches try to be very prescriptive and saying, okay, we're going to use this one very specific security mechanism and apply it to every single chain. We take the other route and say, we're going to just leverage the most secure mechanism that is available in a given ecosystem. And in most cases, that's like a canonical bridge that already exists around a chain or a rollup. So for example, with like Optimism, the Optimism rollup bridge is the most secure way to communicate into that ecosystem because it's the fundamental thing that underlies the security of Optimism in the first place. By taking this approach, which we kind of call like path-specific security or path-specific verification, we believe that Connext can offer the best sort of like the best like security and trust minimization for application developers, which is something that I think over the course of the last couple of years, people have found to be increasingly pressing for bridges, especially given all of the hacks that have happened. Now, what Connext does on top of all of that is, aside from kind of routing to the best verification mechanism, we are what is called an execution layer. So we kind of handle the process of making sure that when a developer interacts with our contracts on the sending chain and makes an asynchronous call to a destination chain contract, we take care of making sure that that call actually happens. And that in many cases, we do what's called fast execution. So we are basically doing that process immediately, even if there is a message that is actually being sent through the underlying canonical bridges. So for example, through like the rollup bridges, through the Polygon POS bridge going through Ethereum, which would have otherwise taken a longer period of time. So I'll kind of pause there because it was a intro to both bridges and then also Connext, and I'm sure that there's like follow-up there that we can get into.
Thank you. VC, did you want to comment on that or talk about Socket's view on this?
No, I think we kind of share a lot of kind of similar philosophy in terms of like how we think about the cross-chain world as well. When we started looking at the space, it was very clear to us that in terms of just like pure asset movement across chains, people want to send USDC across chains as a basic example. There are 150 different ways to do it, and the fragmentation in the bridging space is like much greater than the fragmentation anywhere else, and the market in general is built like that. Just as a comparison, if a user wants to use the DEX, the only thing they care about is the price. But when they want to use a bridge, they have to care about, does it support the token that I want to send? Does it support the chain that I want to send it to? Is it fast? Or like, how fast is it? Is it secure? And how much is it going to cost, right? So a bridge can differentiate from another bridge in like 5 different aspects. That just means that the space is very fragmented, and it's very unlikely that one solution is going to fit for all. So we kind of went with this routing approach for asset bridging as well, where you could come to Socket and you would be like, I have USDC here, get me USDC there, and we would just kind of abstract away all of those bridges and kind of make it happen. Along with this, we are now releasing some like additional messaging properties that would allow you to take certain actions after the asset has been bridged. So you could bridge USDC via the most efficient path and then deposit into, let's say, Aave or like some other protocol. Yeah, I'll take a pause there.
Makes sense. And Vitalik made this famous tweet a while back where he expressed skepticism about a multi-chain world. He kind of is of the belief that multi-chain could be bad because of potential contagion that could be caused if there's a hack. What do you guys think about that? Do you agree with his point of view on that? Do you have a different point of view?
So I think like this is something that I think a lot of people really misunderstand. Basically, Vitalik doesn't believe that a cross rollup world is not possible. In fact, that's actually the only kind of world we could possibly live in is a world where there are multiple execution environments. The goal of the post was basically to point out why rollups are better than alternative chains. But the way that the post is phrased makes it sound as though he's against the like general idea of having cross execution environment communication at all, which doesn't really make sense. So I think the goal, like the idea behind Vitalik's post, is that, and this is kind of what I touched on earlier. There's like a couple of different trust minimized ways to like verify information that goes between chains. The one that is the most trust minimized for two individual chains is like clients. And then the one that is most trust minimized overall is a rollup. And the difference between those two is that in a like client environment, or in any environment where you have two separate chains, there always exists some possibility that the validator set of one chain produces duplicate invalid states. And that can happen in a 51% attack. That can happen in any instance where like one chain wants to like spoof data to the other chain. And that is a vulnerability that always exists. Rollups are explicitly the solution to this vulnerability. Now, from a practical perspective, is it realistic that everybody is going to like be building on top of one singular settlement layer? No. Is that actually a good thing? Definitely not. Like we should absolutely have multiple settlement layers just for like anti-fragility purposes. But the kind of key point of that post was that a world where most communication is happening like between rollups through rollup bridges is far, far better than a world where the vast majority of like chains or vast majority of like execution environments are alternative chains, and you have communication happening between them through like clients. So basically, Vitalik was just taking pot shots at Cosmos there.
Yeah,
And VC, do
I
you
think
make the same point?
yeah, I think like recently there have been some new stuff come out on the rollup side, things like sovereign rollups. So they are as secure as light clients again. So like the space is moving so fast that these kind of definitions kind of keep changing, and I'm sure like Vitalik definitely has a point, and there is a good amount of I think what we need to focus on is the frequency of cross-chain communication across heterogeneous environments is going to be less, and the frequency between homogeneous environment, so like cross-rollup communication, stuff like that, or like Cosmos chain communication or cross parachain communication, that's always going to be higher because it's much safer, much more trust minimized. I think one other thing that a lot of people miss from the same post that Vitalik made was the fact that you cannot have a different DA and a settlement chain. Both of them need to live on the same chain. Otherwise, they have the same problem as the future is not cross chain. But yeah, a lot of people miss that point. I think cross chain has a lot of demand, and people will build stuff.
Yeah, I mean, my point of view on this is that it's practical. People are going to build cross-chain apps whether you want them to or not. Like you can't stop people from needing that use case. It's just practical. So we need to build tools to solve for that use case. You can't just tell people don't do it. People are going to do it whether you want them to or not, right? So might as well give them the tools to make it safe.
Yeah. But it's also just like how the internet works, right? It's like everything on the internet is asynchronous. As a web developer, you are already used to the concept of like building in an environment where you're interacting with resources that live in multiple other environments that you're interacting with asynchronously. And like it stands to reason that blockchains will work the same way.
That's right. I mean, you look at cloud, for example, right? How many different programming stacks exist in cloud, right? There's .NET, there's Node, there's Ruby on Rails, Rust, PHP, etc., right? And they can all interact with each other, right? You can call RESTful APIs, and they all work well together. And that's a hodgepodge is the only practical solution out there, I think, for how things will be. You know, that's realistic in my point of view. So, so dovetailing on that, we do have this kind of like interesting choice between whether we support wrapped assets versus native assets when we do kind of move assets and do transactions across chains. Do you guys have a point of view on whether you would recommend one approach versus the other approach and how your architectures handle that? Any thoughts on native versus wrapped assets?
I think both me and Arjun are on the native side for this one. I'll just kind of quickly take a stab at this. So I think definitely native wherever it's possible, and like I think the notion that wrapped assets are bad. I think that's also very extreme. There needs to be wrapped asset. But what we need to make sure is the party that's minting the wrapped asset, that's the safest possible one for that particular chain. So let's kind of have like canonical safe messaging bridge that can mint wrapped assets of that chain, and then let's have like kind of bridges kind of do cross-chain swapping with that. That's I think the safest way to do it. I think Connect kind of does it similarly. Arjun, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think like there's where we are now, and then I think where we're going to end up. Where we are now is that there's like three general like high level approaches to how you can transfer assets between chains. One is you have sort of like a direct swap of like one representation of an asset for another representation of an asset, which is like an RFQ system, which is kind of how Connect's V1 worked. The other is an approach where you basically like you're still like minting and writing an asset between both chains, and so you have like a wrapped asset or a representative asset that is specific to your protocol, but then you swap it at the source and destination. That's how like Hop works and how Connect's V2 works. And the idea there is like by doing that you're just ensuring at the kind of last mile that the user gets the right asset because it's like the best experience. And the last one is kind of the most like the earliest form of this, which is what multi-chain and a bunch of other people did, where like they were just saying, okay, we're just going to give you like multi USDC or any USDC, which it's like it is representative of USDC on a given chain, and it does hold that value as long as the system is secure, but it's not very meaningful. You can't use it in DeFi because it's not fungible against other things. That's kind of where we are now, and that's actually a big part of why like it's important to have stuff like liquidity aggregation, because there are liquidity pools of these assets that live on every chain that you need to have in order to actually give the right asset to the user. I would like long term, for what it's worth, I think this kills our moat. I think this kills aggregators. I think this kills like half of the bird space. But I think the long term correct solution is actually to move away from this. And it's a bit controversial, but my thesis is like there's going to be thousands of rollups. Bootstrapping liquidity on all of them is going to be impossible. And the reality is the best approach is to actually just like have direct fungibility between the asset that is minted by a given bridge and the asset that's minted by the canonical bridge, or do the across model where you're actually just using the canonical bridge from the get-go to mint the asset in the first place. And I think there's actually ways to do that. We've kind of been exploring it, just again for pure public good reasons, wrapper contracts that you can create that would allow for an asset to have like multiple minters and burners. This is kind of similar to some work that Seller did a couple of years ago. But I think that there's an approach there where like you can get to the point where for the vast majority of assets, for the vast majority of transactions across most chains, you can actually do like one-to-one transactions, or at least one-to-one less some like very like just some constant fee. And I think that that's the best ultimate outcome, right? Like as a user, it's really weird, and it's as a developer, it's really challenging to have to deal with like, oh, I'm sending a transaction across chains, but I don't know how much I'm going to get at the destination in order to be able to like do something with it.
Yeah.
VC, any thoughts?
To add on what Arjun said, I think one interesting experiment that Frax did was very interesting to monitor. I think this could be a potential kind of middle path for the discussion that we are having. So the discussion is wrapped asset versus native assets, and who actually decides what the native thing is. It's the protocol itself or the application that's using it. So kind of tying back to the Frax example, Frax kind of created I'm not sure if I'm 100% accurate here, but Frax kind of created this like box where they were like, okay, we'll kind of create this vault and we'll allow multiple bridges to mint like native Frax. And they could add like, bridges on top. So they had like integration with Seller, AnySwap, and multiple bridges could natively mint Frax. And the governance kind of controlled who gets to mint, how much, stuff like that. So it's like Frax controlled Frax minting. That was like a very interesting middle path, I would say. And I think a lot of other protocols would start moving in this direction. Liquidity does not scale. There's not enough liquidity to send $10 million USDC right now, and I don't think that will be a future. But yeah, I think this middle path could be very interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah, for sure.
One last topic I want to touch on for today is just the topic of security in bridges and the hacks that we've seen in the last year. They've been all over the news, and many of the major bridges have been hacked. You guys have been pretty safe, I think, but and congratulations on that, by the way. But I wanted to just hear from you. What are the lessons learned from the prior bridge hacks that we can apply in our projects going forward? What are the big lessons learned and best practices that we can apply from those incidents? Any thoughts?
This is another controversial one. So not controversial necessarily, but it doesn't. I can't imagine most bridges are going to be happy about this, but I think it's going to happen no matter what. And that is, I think the vast majority of the security surface area of every bridge comes from verification. So however that bridge is like verifying the state of messages that go across chains, and like every single bridge hack that's happened so far has happened at the verification layer. Even like the implementation ones, basically there was something at the verification layer, a bug there that caused it to get hacked. The solution to this, and everyone would hate this, but the solution to this is basically to just turn it into a market, aggressively commoditize, and like force like a race to the bottom, and basically make everybody enter into like perfect competition on security. I think there are projects now that are doing this. So for one example that we're supporting heavily is Hashi, for doing L1 to L1 communication. And the idea there is like, even in an ultimate end state where we have 4 to 5 different ZK-like client implementations built by like Succinct and ZK-IBC and et cetera, there is still a risk of the actual like client implementations having a bug in them. So how do you actually fix that? Client diversity. You do like an M of N of 3 to 4 different ZK-like clients that are proving a message route across chains, and by creating this like environment where they're all effectively like competing on accuracy against one another in like a perfect way, and there's no sort of moat or anything like that, you force a situation where the user gets the best possible security. In my opinion, I think that's like the only long-term way for this ecosystem to succeed, because like, I mean, even as like as a stakeholder in this game, I think it would be fundamentally extremely risky for the space if Connex was the only project operating at the layer that we're operating at. And I think that's true for every single bridge project. Like, I think we need to kind of recognize that like it's just too critical of infrastructure for any one project to do by themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a solid point. I think the market is pretty weird with this stuff actually, because kind of doing this would cost like, let's say $200 per message, and there is a lot of people who can't make that trade-off. So unfortunately, my opinion is like, this will kind of happen for now, and this is like the right way to, like the most secure way to do things. I think we should go in this direction for now, and as these projects kind of build up Lindy effect around their smart contracts, people can start using them independently again, right? So like let's deploy these systems, let's use them together in production, like this MFN systems, multiple messaging bridges together, and then slowly as these kind of systems mature, we can maybe start using them separately, independently. That's more, I think, capital efficient, and people would definitely want to not have to send $200 per message.
Well, for what it's worth, there are ways to like amortize those costs down to zero, right? Because you can batch those messages really aggressively, which you would do in any bridge otherwise anyway, and that would drive the cost down significantly. And then, of course, you can also do things like relay the message optimistically, and then like have it reconcile against like a batch later. So you can then the message itself becomes like free, right? It's just the cost of gas. So I think there are ways around that, and then in the long term, the idea is you can do kind of some of the techniques that exist on the internet today, where you could like send a message through like one or a couple of paths, and then every now and then send like dummy messages to see if the paths are responsive, just as like pings and like basically just have like fisherman checks on which approaches are actually like consistently working well. But yeah, it's like, I agree that like there's going to be like, this market's going to change in the long term a lot, so we don't know yet, but at least for now, this appears to be the best option.
For sure, I would 100% agree.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you very much. If folks in the audience want to learn more about your technologies, can you just kind of in the chat type in your the websites for each of your projects? And I want to thank both of you for being here today. Very impressive, by the way, your comments today, and I think we learned a lot. So thank you for both of you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks
so
for
we'll be
having me.
right back. Of course. We're right back with the president of the Solana Foundation.